Welcome back to another video of Sci-Facts. So today we will be covering simple machines, some different forms of energy, and the creation of a Rube Goldberg machine. So let's get into it. There are 6 different types of simple machines: a lever, an inclined plane, a screw, a wedge, a pulley, and a wheel and axle. All of these only include a few moving parts, and that's what makes them basic. They all also allow for you to do more work with less energy and effort consumed, and that's why we created them. So an inclined plane is a flat sloped surface like this, so it have like something like that allows for you to exert your force over a longer period of time as you travel up it, but you have to put less force instead of having to carry something straight up if you're trying to get to this point. And that's what makes it optimal. So examples of an inclined plane would be a ramp. Next, we move on to a wedge. And a wedge, for an example of a wedge, is a zipper. Since a zipper allows for you're technically pushing down, but your force is being applied to both the sides as these separate. So you're changing the direction of the force and you're making it separate. So you're applying force and changing the direction of the force. And a wedge is basically just a moving inclined plane. And some examples are a zipper and a blade of an axe. So we move on to what is a wheel and axle. A wheel and axle are 2 circular or cylinder objects fastened together that rotate around a common axis. And the larger one being the wheel and the smaller one is the axis. It works by having the wheels spin. Since that wheel is larger, the axle is caused to spin and exert a larger output force. So an example would be a car's steering wheel and a doorknob. We move on to the pulley, which is a grooved wheel with a rope around it. So it'd be like a wheel and then a rope around it. By pulling on one end of the rope, you're able to lift something attached to the other side. And this allows you to lower the amount of force needed to pull that object up at once, since you're pulling slowly as it pulls down. And it also lets you change the direction of the force you need to pull, because if you were using the pulley, you would have to pull up to lift something up, but now you're able to push down, which is easier than having to pull up. And some examples of a pulley are a crane and the top of a flagpole. Next, we move on to the screw, which is a cylinder with a spiral going around it. So like here, like a cylinder with a spiral thread going around it. So it works like an inclined plane, since it allows for you to put in less force over a longer period of time as you travel technically down the incline. And this allows for it makes it much easier to close the lid like this way instead of having to put a bunch of force to close it like that, as it is much easier to close like this. So an examples of screw would be jar lids, light bulbs, and bolts. Lever is the last simple machine, and it is a rigid bar that is free to rotate or pivot around a fixed point. And a fixed point in a lever is called a fulcrum. So, and depending on where the fulcrum is located determines which one of the 3 different type of classes a lever is. And the difference between those 2 is just all 3 of those are just the different locations of the fulcrum. So lever works by having you put force on one side, having you put force on one side and creating output force on the other. So an example of a lever is a teeter-totter, since you're applying force here, but you're creating force, an output force here. Sometimes they're sort of like a nutcracker. You're applying force in the same area, but it's a little different as you still are applying force, and it creates an output force in the inside of the nutcracker. So we continue on, and that's why examples of a lever are nutcrackers, scissors, and shovels. Now let's get into some different forms of energy. So the first one we're going to cover is gravitational potential energy, and that's the stored energy within an object that has the potential to fall. So like right now, this football has the potential to fall off my hand since it's on the end. And then when it does fall, that's when we shift over to kinetic energy, which is the energy that is produced by something in motion. So when this football is thrown, the energy that is created when it's thrown is kinetic energy. And then we move on to thermal/heat energy, which is the energy created by atoms moving inside a substance. And this is what creates heat. So an example of this is baking in an oven or the warmth produced by the sun. Next, we have sound energy, which moves in waves and is created when an object or substance vibrates. So such examples are a balloon popping, an instrument playing, and a bee buzzing. And even just a smack can count as sound energy, since my kinetic energy is transferring into sound energy. Elastic energy is stored in elastic objects that are being stretched out or like pulled apart. So like a rubber band being pulled on, or any sort of band being pulled apart, or even a coiled spring, all contain elastic energy since they're being stretched out, and once they're released, that energy would transfer into kinetic energy. And then we also have chemical energy, which is what holds atoms and molecules together and is also stored inside of them. So examples of things that contain chemical energy would be food, natural gases, and petroleum. And we move on to our last form of energy, which is nuclear energy, and that is held inside the nucleuses of atoms, and it is shown like produced, like the energy is produced through either nuclear fission, which is the splitting of nuclei, or nuclear fusion, which is the combining of nuclei. And we can see this in the real world take place at nuclear power plants, where the split or nuclear fission nuclei of uranium. Let's finish up by watching a video of a Rube Goldberg machine I created myself this year with some of my friends. And just to explain to you what a Rube Goldberg machine is, it is a machine that takes a bunch of unnecessary steps to complete like a simple task. So like a bunch of machine that like rolled the ball down a cliff, went into a pulley, all that just to like flip a light on. And that's what a Rube Goldberg machine is.
So our simple machine starts off with a ball rolling down a ramp, which turns gravitational potential energy into kinetic energy. Then the ball rolls down and hits the wheel and axle cart and pushes it down the incline. The cart rolls down and pushes the mass off of the rubber band. This causes the marble to fall and go down the screw and hit the tambourine. And after that's done, we've completed our final goal.
Thank you for watching the video, and please consider subscribing.